So welcome to session number 2 of the transformation of worldview. And the first one, we kind of introduced the concept of worldview as articulated and instructed by N.T. Wright. And we're going to dive deep this time into the Roman worldview at the time of Christ, the Greco-Roman worldview. And we're going to use that tool developed by N.T. Wright in his book, The New Testament and the People of God. His model, which includes 4 things that make up one's worldview: the story or the narrative, the symbols, the praxis or the practices and actions that you do without thinking about it, and fourth, the question to the 5 worldview questions, which are: who are we? Where are we? What's wrong? What's the solution? And what time is it? Last time I mentioned John 18 and 19 and this interaction between Jesus and Pilate in John's Gospel, and Pontius Pilate embodying the worldview of the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus, and him and Jesus having this trial, which is really not just a disagreement but a clash of worldview. So what is the Roman worldview at the time of Christ? So let's start with story. Again, just to kind of go back, our hope is to begin to think about things through the lens of this worldview model so that we can analyze people's worldviews and get a better understanding of their beliefs, the thoughts that they have, the way that they lived, and get a clearer and better picture of them. So what's the Roman worldview? Starting with story. Rome began its existence as a city-state through a number of victorious wars and battles. It became synonymous with what we now call Italy, and eventually, through their power and through wars and through battles, they took over much of what the Western world was, the Middle East, even into Asia. And Rome was basically this giant empire, but unlike other empires, Rome didn't have an emperor. It had, instead of an emperor, 2 consuls, proconsuls, who would kind of balance power. And Julius Caesar, through a number of great political moves, victorious battles, he became the central power figure of the Roman Empire. And before him, like I just mentioned, the empire had 2 consuls to balance that power out. And it was really because Caesar gained so much power that it led to his assassination by people who thought he had gained too much power. And after his assassination, there was a great civil war that happened in the Roman Empire between Mark Antony and Cleopatra on one side, and the heir apparent of Julius Caesar, his heir Octavian. And Octavian won this civil war and became the first emperor of the Roman Empire. And Octavian's name changed at that point from Octavian to Augustus, Caesar Augustus. And his writers and his historians did a really good job of telling the story of the Roman Empire, of this long sequence of events that led to this climax, or this golden age of the empire, when Augustus was raised as the penultimate kind of ruler and power figure of the empire. It was now with Augustus the age where Julius Caesar, stories were told of when Julius Caesar died, he ascended to the heavens, and that meant he became a god. And so Augustus became the son of Julius Caesar, but the son of God. He was basically the divinely ordained leader in this golden age of the empire. He was the bringer of justice, the bringer of peace, the bringer of freedom, albeit through military power, to the Roman Empire. So that's basically the story of this long sequence of events leading to Augustus being raised up as the Son of God, the high priest, the bringer of peace and justice in the Roman Empire. And now we are in this time of the golden age in the empire. So what were the symbols that helped to tell that story and support that story? First of all, you had the currency at the time, which was Roman coins. And you have to remember at the time, there wasn't a ton of marketing material. Coins were thus a big deal in the marketing of this kind of empire. There weren't billboards and signs and papers and the internet at the time. So coins, that was the currency, but it was also this way of spreading this story, and it became a symbol that reinforced the story with the image of Augustus as the high priest. And on those coins, it would have a picture of the bust of Augustus with titles like Son of God or High Priest or Bringer of Peace and Justice, Emperor, things like that. And so those coins were really symbols of this story, this great golden age with Augustus as the ruler of it. Another symbol was the statues of the Roman emperors and of their families, the royal family. And these weren't just placed in Rome, but they were placed throughout the empire, Egypt, Spain, the Middle East. In all these Roman colonies, there were these statues which helped to reinforce the leadership who was in charge and leading the empire through this kind of golden age. So with coins and with these statues, you see symbols that help to contribute to the way that the Romans at the time saw the world. So Rome had become like the lady of the world and had burst on the scene and had basically conquered the world and was now ushering in, through Augustus, the bringer of peace, the Son of God, the high priest, an age of peace and justice and freedom, and a golden age for the empire. And that, like I said, was happening through military victory and conquest. And if necessary, it would happen through violence. And that violence could even lead to crucifixion if you dared to challenge this view of the world in too dramatic a way or in too pointed a way. So those were the symbols. So what was the praxis of this kind of in this worldview quadrant? First of all, you had the Romans had built a whole system of great roads throughout the empire that allowed the Roman life to spread, and people and merchants would use these roads to build up economic prosperity in the empire, but also spread the Roman way of life. So these roads would lead to Roman colonies that would be established throughout the empire in large cities using these roads. And those cities, through people traveling, merchants on them, economic kind of prosperity, the military using them, actually brought Roman culture to new parts of the empire, whether it be in the Middle East and even into Asia or Africa and up into what we know as the Western world and Europe now. So that was one thing, this whole system of roads, and that led to colonies. Another thing was the Roman justice system. This was a big practical way that Romans thought they were bringing justice to the world, right? They were bringing their way of resolving conflict and justice and ruling. It was a way of resolving conflict. It was a way of bringing justice to the world. So that was another practice, this Roman justice system. Of course, you had military expediency, so victory and conquering through military power. No one really could match the Romans' military establishment. They were basically victorious everywhere they went. And that practice of conquering and going beyond led to this narrative of being a golden age of the Roman Empire coming to conquer the world, and the story that the Roman Empire was the leaders of this world. So those are three ways. Another thing that was really, really big practice of the time, very different than ours, was on a societal level, there was social stratification. So there were tiers in society, and everyone who was coming up in the Roman Empire knew what tier you were at. And you were living in a culture based on honor and shame. So at the top of it, of this social stratification, is certainly the emperor and the royal family. But also you would have the Senate, and you would still have consuls and other magistrates who were very close to the top. Then you would have other classes of workers that would go down. And then at the bottom of that would be slaves and prisoners. Then at the bottom of that you would have slaves and prisoners that were on the bottom, and they really had no rights in the Roman Empire. Slavery in the Roman Empire is different than our understanding of slavery. It wasn't based on race like in our history here in the United States, but it was based basically on people who had been conquered by the Roman Empire. So you could go from a really high social tier in one society, get conquered in battle, and move to the lowest rung of slave or prisoner in the Roman system. And slaves and prisoners had basically no rights. They weren't even people. The owners really had complete rights over them. Lastly, in terms of practice that's different than ours, was religion was very much a public practice in the Roman Empire. It's different than our day, where religion is a private affair that you as an individual get to decide. In the Roman time, it was in the public realm. And for the Romans in the earth and in their cities, there were two realms that were always present there, and that was the realm of humans, but also the realm of gods. And both those, the gods and humans, both occupied the space in their cities and throughout the empire. So if something went wrong, like you lost a battle or you had a bad harvest, or if there was some natural disaster or there was a fire, then the reason was that the gods were not pleased with you, and some sacrifice or offering would need to be made to those gods to appease them and appease their anger. And often the leaders at the highest social stratification, the magistrates, the consuls, in the higher classes, were also the leaders of the religion. So religion and the gods were very much part of the story. They were part of the reason that Rome was so good, is the gods of the Roman Empire were clearly the gods that were favoring them in the earth. And they were part of the reason that Rome had been elevated as the leader of the world. And also at the time, there was a big rise and a big growth in emperor worshiping the emperor Augustus as a god, or Caesar, who had passed away, as a god. And that was a development and part of the practice. So the cult of the emperor as a god was growing in influence. So those are the practices: the road and colony system, the justice system, the military expediency, the social stratification, and religion, the religion of gods and humans, and both being part of the story and part of the practice. So to the questions: who are we? How would Romans answer that? I think they would say that we're Romans, and we belong to the Roman Empire. And we as an empire are the leaders in the world in bringing peace and justice to the rest of the earth. So that's who we are. So where are we? We're in the Roman Empire, in the Roman world, which was basically the whole world, in the Golden Age, the age where Augustus has been raised as a god, as a son of God at the time. That's where we are. So what's wrong? There's still some bits out there that are causing issues in the Middle East. For example, that was an area of great tension in the Roman Empire, and it was an area of tension because it was a very important trade route from Egypt to the rest of the empire to bring grain from Egypt to the rest of the world to feed that. It was the outer world, but it was very, very important. There was, of course, the rest of the world outside of the Roman Empire, but that world didn't really matter so much. It was the world at which some point the Romans would conquer it. So the problem is basically you got some tensions in the empire, you got these outer worlds, but those are the worlds that are going to be conquered. So what was the solution to what was wrong? The solution often was ending in violence. So through military victory in battle, Rome is going to bring peace and justice to the world. This is how the Roman rule would be extended, and that's how the problems are going to be taken care of. And like I mentioned earlier, if necessary, crucifixion would be a means of maintaining peace within the Roman world and maintaining the Roman worldview. What time is it? It's the Golden Age. It's the age of Rome having conquered the world. We have reached the penultimate point, and Rome is the bringer of peace with Augustus. And in fact, with every succeeding emperor to Augustus, there would be the story of a new golden age with a new emperor. And so those are the 5 questions. So what were the beliefs of Romans? Well, in spite of bad emperors and bad ruling, the belief in this golden age and this imperial kind of ideology, it persisted, which talks about underlying story that still needed to be believed in spite of evidence that maybe it wasn't quite the golden age. So that was still the belief, even in spite, and that was still the story in spite of evidence to the contrary. Also, there was the belief, while there might have been arguments over various gods, and certainly there was ways of being a Stoic or an Epicurean at the time, religion was still very much part of the public life. So belief in the gods, worship of the gods was important to do as a Roman citizen in order to keep up this story and narrative. And for a Roman, the aim of their life was, just for the typical Roman, was probably not a lot different than ours. It was to get a little bit ahead in this life. Maybe you'll take a step up the social ladder. It's harder to step up the social ladder. It would have been easier to take steps lower, but maybe you could take one step up and bring more honor to your family. And some folks embraced that idea, and others were cynical about that idea of growing. But that was really the story. So that kind of gives us, using this model of story, praxis, symbol, and questions, to get an idea and a picture into the Roman worldview. And as you can see, as we begin to see with Jesus, you can see how the in Christ narrative and story and the things that he was doing and saying began to challenge that this world was actually in a golden age, and that certainly that Augustus was the Son of God and the Roman Empire was the bringer of justice. We'll get into that in future sessions. But that should give us an idea. Thank you.